Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who is Professor Jamsheed Choksy. Professor Choksy is the distinguished professor. He is the former chair of the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures, the former chair of the Department of Central Eurasia Studies, and he's currently the director of the Inner Asia and Uralic National Resources Center at the Indiana University at Bloomington. Well, Professor Choksy, and welcome back to The Missing Piece.
Thank you for having me back.
Well, Professor Choksy, this timing couldn't be perfect. Now, I want to get started our conversation based on an article that written by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, this is how the person described this upcoming meeting between the two countries of Iran and US. This is what person said. Iran is ready for indirect negotiations with the US, and the ball is in Americans' court. Professor Choksy, you are the expert, and you and I would discuss the relationship between the two countries for numerous occasions. Very simple question. For this upcoming meeting on Saturday, regardless it's indirect negotiation or direct negotiation, what are the expectations, and particularly from the Iranian side, and how do you think American side is going to react? Your thoughts?
Excellent question. Let's actually step back just from what's coming up on Saturday to what happened on Tuesday. On Tuesday, Iran, Russia, and China met in Moscow to talk about Iran's nuclear program. So clearly there was this tripartite set of conversations that occurred as a precursor to this upcoming meeting. And the general consensus is that Beijing and Moscow would like to see a de-escalation of tensions between the United States and Iran, because ultimately it would benefit everyone. So given that background, and yet at the same time, Beijing and Moscow are very clear that they support Iran's right to a peaceful nuclear program. So given that setting, we now move to Oman and Muscat for Saturday's talks. And the interesting aspect of this is, while the Iranians insist that these are going to be indirect talks, that is, they will talk to the Omanis, then the Omanis will go talk to the Americans in another room, then they'll come back and talk to the Iranians, and so on and so forth. The Trump administration insists that these are going to be direct talks. So one has to assume that at the very least, the American representatives are authorized to meet face-to-face with their Iranian counterparts. So I think what will be interesting to see is whether at any point there actually is direct contact and direct negotiations. Now, it is possible, Will, that those will occur, but we will never be told about them. In other words, the Iranians will maintain their position that there were no direct talks. The Iranians have that position because they say that they do not want direct talks until, and here's the interesting aspect of it, until President Trump's words, not so much the sanctions he has on Iran, but that the Iranians want him to stop threatening to bomb Iran's nuclear program. So they say until that point they will not to have direct talks, though it's quite possible that the Americans have been authorized to, sometimes these things you accidentally run into your counterpart in the hallway. So it'll be interesting to see how far these negotiations go.
Well, Professor Choksy, now, one thing that we do know is Donald Trump is what I called unpredictable character, or some call it Donald Trump is a disruptor of the modern political system. Now, as what you just mentioned, not only that we need to pay attention to the rhetoric under Donald Trump, And also we need to understand this intention or this ambition under Donald Trump. But meanwhile, I want to go back to the article that, again, written by the Minister of the Foreign Affairs. And this is what he wrote, and I quote, "We face a significant wall of mistrust and harbor serious doubts about the sincerity of the tension, made worse by the U.S. insistence on resuming the, quote, maximum pressure policy prior to any diplomatic interactions," end quote. Professor Choksy, from your perspective, again, you are the expert, but to us, it looks like the foreign minister has already pointed fingers and also already laid the groundwork to say it's not the Iranian side worry about the talk. It's the American side should be cautious about the steps to take. So it's, again, from the rhetoric perspective, we're looking at Donald Trump's words, but meanwhile, we're looking at the attitude from the Iranian side. What do you make of that?
I see both of these as posturing. In other words, President Trump says, that he, as you pointed out, he's the disruptor. He makes threats, but at the same time, again, back to this notion of being a disruptive, unpredictable. He also talks about working with Iran, making Iran great again. So it's a combination of, yes, we can do business, but if we don't do business, then there will be punitive action. The interesting aspect of this is that despite his threats to bomb Iran, President Trump generally tends to be risk averse when it comes to military action. In other words, engaging Iran directly in military action is unlikely. It's very different from bombing, let us say, the Houthis. Which has occurred. That's a different scale of action. I think the Iranian position is, of course, understandable as well. They would like to see sanctions lowered rather than upped. So what we can see, as we see even right now in terms of the White House's approach to tariffs, we've seen how he's been ramping it up, then backing down, ramping it up, then giving exemptions. So it is quite possible that the meeting in Oman will be one where each side will posture. But what we should be looking for, and in fact really hoping for, is that behind all the words, the public statements, behind the posturing, that there is the real possibility of reaching a deal. Let us keep in mind that a deal was reached previously, and then President Trump, in his first term, abrogated it. But he also made it clear that he wants a deal. So the potential, the possibility is genuinely there. And I think the possibility is genuinely there on both sides. And what do I mean by both sides? The Iranians need a deal because their economy essentially has collapsed. It's collapsed ultimately not because of sanctions. Sanctions have simply, shall be said, been the icing on the cake. The cake for Iran has been economic mismanagement, a lack of a diverse economy. Let us face it, as we are looking at global issues, the demand for oil is falling, the price for oil is falling. Yes, American sanctions make it hard for Iran to sell its oil, but Iran has been very steadily selling its oil to two major consumers, China and India. But even then, now the price is falling. So Iran really does need the removal of American sanctions. And it does need to be able to reintegrate into the world global economic system. So that is there. The Iranian people want it. The Iranian government knows it needs it. The United States, on the other hand, would like to be able to reassure everyone in the region, their allies, not just Israel, but Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the others, the Emirates, that Iran will not be a nuclear threat. And so I think there are possibilities on both sides. Let us hope that the talks in Oman at least crack open the door.
Professor Choksy, when you use the word deal, or when we pay attention to the word deal under Donald Trump, and of course that he's very boastful about the book that he wrote. It's called Art of the Deal. I mean, again, if you look at the media, it's all over the place. But meanwhile, Professor Choksy, go back to what you just said. Looking at what's happening today regarding the tariff war that he placed upon the countries, it's one story today, but it could be something different within the next minute. It's rather to have the consistency within the same administration. So the next question to you is going back to the sentence written by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran. How should Iran to trust that someone like Donald Trump or the Trump administration, it's not going to back and forth after the talk? If I know this might be crazy, even right now we're talking about this, but remember, for the country of Iran, they are looking for consistency and they are looking for a solid promise from the Trump administration. How can they get that while seeing this trade wars or this tariff wars that Donald Trump created in a global sense? What do you say to that?
What I would respond is that there is a consistency when one looks closely, and that is the President of the United States ramps up actions, but and he expects that by so doing, that there will be some sort of, if you wish to, negotiation that he would then see as producing a deal. So when you look at the tariffs, he ramped up the tariffs. There are discussions occurring between countries. And so he has placed the tariffs in abeyance for 90 days. On the other hand, we still have to see whether the United States and China can de-escalate their escalating tariffs. And again, the general feeling is that at some point there'll be a backing down. In the case of Iran, yes, I think we should see the statement of the foreign minister from two sides. One aimed at the Americans, the other aimed at not just the Iranian domestic public, but the Iranian ruling or political class. In other words, the Iranian political class cannot be seen as essentially capitulating. In other words, they have to be able to tell their own supporters, see, we got a good deal too. And so they are holding their ground. So I'm not at all surprised by this. I don't think that we're going to see any sort of major breakthrough in Oman. I think it's a gradual process. However, while on the one hand I say we may not see a breakthrough, the interesting aspect about President Trump is that if the terms are right, he could ink the deal tomorrow. That's, it was, as we say, he likes being able to display deals. And so the potential for Iran being able to fully maintain its civilian nuclear program is almost certainly there. What the Iranians will need to demonstrate very clearly is that they are not making progress on the nuclear side. Now, that does not need to be forever. It can be for 10 years or 15 years. In a sense, shall we say, almost similar to the deal that there was previously, with, shall I say, some enhanced safeguards, enhanced verification. And the other interesting aspect is that what we are not hearing currently from the Trump administration is what they said previously. Previously, they wanted a more comprehensive deal. Nuclear plus Iran, not being involved in terrorism, etc. The ground has shifted in the Middle East. Assad is gone. So Iran's Syrian ally is gone. Hezbollah is retrenching. Hamas is on the defensive. The Houthis essentially are, and most importantly, are no longer attacking the global trade. They're attacking the American ships in the region. That's something Trump can deal with. Because those are, shall we say, not successful attacks. They're expensive to defend against. So the ground has shifted. It is therefore easier for the Trump administration to focus directly on the nuclear issue, because it does not have to also satisfy its own supporters and its own regional allies by having to focus so much on Iran's regional activities.
Professor Choksy,
so the potential for the nuclear deal, if I may say so, is focusing on that is quite possible.
Professor Choksy, I want to bring China into our conversation. I mean, again, we know that for this upcoming Saturday meeting between Iran and the U.S., it's also significant for China. I mean, again, going back to what we discussed before, we'll look at this tariff war or trade war that Donald Trump initiated. Despite that he put 90 days freeze on most of the countries, he actually increased the tariff upon the country of China. So China surely it's looking for leverages or looking for ways to reduce the tension between US and China at this moment. But again, on the other side, we know that the relationship, particularly this economic partnership between Iran and China, are getting closer and closer. So, Professor, from your perspective, I dare to ask the question, why is the meeting on Saturday also crucial for China? What do you think China is looking for out of the deal between the two countries?
And that's a fascinating question, because I think at this point, and you made a very excellent point here, that is, right now, President Trump placed tariffs. President Xi responded with tariffs. Trump then escalated the tariffs. So, I think we should also see the meetings in Oman as yet another backdoor set of negotiations where China's role in bringing Iran to the table, China being able to, let us say, convince Iran to work with the Trump administration, can serve to de-escalate not just the tensions between the United States and China, but de-escalate the tariffs. I think we should see a lot of this as interconnected. Trump escalating tariffs is not just simply about tariffs, it's also about a message to China. Hey, assist us with Iran, or we'll put pressure on you. Okay, so this is three-dimensional chess involving multiple countries. The Russians are involved too. Now, the Russian stake in this is the Ukraine negotiations. So there are all these moving parts, and certainly the larger. If one was to say, what would be a perfect resolution? A perfect resolution would be that Iran would remain an important regional power, but a non-nuclear weapons power, which would certainly be good for the region, because a nuclear Iran would mean you'd have a nuclear Saudi Arabia, a nuclear Arab Emirates, etc. In other words, too many atomic weapons and hydrogen bombs lying around, which is not good. Now, likewise, what would be an ultimate optimal resolution to the tariff wars? Namely, countries not having tariffs. In other words, global free trade. And it's interesting that we even have Trump's very special advisor, Elon Musk, talking about zero tariffs. So, on the one hand, while the President Trump may appear to be protectionist, the interesting end goal could be a return to globalization. Iran gets pulled back into the global system. Tariffs get reduced across the board bilaterally and multilaterally. So I think the Iran negotiations are part of, shall we say, all this, I wouldn't say so much a reordering of the global system, because it is quite likely the global system will survive.
Professor Choksy, I have two more questions before letting you go. Now, let's go back to the article. Almost towards the end of the article, the foreign minister also wrote regarding this welcoming business opportunities. Again, this is what he wrote, and I quote, "The truth is that we are open to welcoming businesses from around the world. It is the U.S. administration and congressional impediments, not Iran, that have kept American enterprises away from the trillion-dollar opportunity that access to our economy represents." End quote. Professor Choksy,
that's aimed directly at Donald Trump.
There you go. That's right. That you basically go ahead of my question. So, how do we understand that? Because again, as you mentioned before, economy is crucial for Iran. So by having this attitude, or by laying the ground to say that Iran is very much open and welcome businesses, what can we expect, or what is the hidden message behind the lines?
I think the hidden message behind the lines is, yes, we should get to a nuclear deal, and at the end of it, the expectation from Iran will be the removal of sanctions, or even the suspension of sanctions. Even if it's not removed, it could be reduced, or it could be suspended, so that that trade can resume. And essentially, yes, what Iran is offering the Trump administration is not just de-escalation of tensions, but the opportunity for Americans' businesses to return to Iran. And remember, after this very long period where Iran has been isolated economically from the world, it is very fertile ground for there to be business opportunities for the United States. But also, let's remember, American sanctions do ultimately constrict other countries doing business with Iran, including China. And so essentially what we're being told is, hey, this is an opportunity to open the Iranian economy to the entire world. And in some ways, what the foreign minister of Iran is saying, therefore, is, look, China, it'll benefit China. Russia, it'll benefit Russia. Britain, it'll benefit Britain. So, in a sense, you guys also put pressure on the Trump administration to try to reach a deal.
Professor Choksy, I want to end our conversation by asking you the last question. Again, we know in the midst of the trade wars, in the midst of the tariff wars, current Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, also paid a short visit to the White House. Now, right out in front of the public, especially the media, Trump was very confident about the meeting on Saturday. But meanwhile, it looked to the media, or even looked to the journalists, that Netanyahu, or Bibi, somehow was a bit anxious about what's going to happen on Saturday. So again, Professor Choksy, from your perspective, what is that in for Israel if, let's just say, the doors can be cracked open on Saturday, or if we say the sanctions or even the rhetoric can be softened? How does that paint a good picture or even a promising direction for Israel? Your final thoughts.
Well, it is interesting that President Trump makes that announcement right there when he did it, because once again, I think he was sending a message to Bibi as well. That is that President Trump ultimately wants a deal with Iran. And I keep using the word deal because, yes, he is ultimately a businessman, and he's very clear about that. He likes deals. He talks about deals. So let's use his language. And so he's sending a message to Israel that, yes, he does want to deal with Iran, and that when he has the deal ready, he will certainly expect that Israel be protected. But at the same time, he expects Israel to play along as well. I think that's essentially what he's saying, the message he's sending. He's saying, yes, he's made it very clear he will protect Israel. And his expectation will be that Iran, as part of the deal, backpedal its own anti-Israeli rhetoric, and certainly rhetoric aside, not be able to pose a military threat to Israel. That, I think, will have to be in play. On the other hand, he's also telling Bibi, if and when that occurs, Israel's going to have to play along as well. And so I think the President of the United States may be a little too optimistic about what the outcome on Saturday will be. However, particularly because he's a disruptor, because he's unpredictable, you never know what the outcome will be. In other words, they could come out on Saturday, everyone holding hands and cheering, or we could be, it could appear that there's no progress being made. However, the fact that they are beginning to talk again is ultimately, it perhaps will be the most important progress, even if we are told that those conversations were only indirect. Because there's something I have heard quite often from my diplomatic friends, and I'll leave you with this thought. Quite often, while diplomats even are officially told that you cannot interact with each other, they happen to bump into each other in the hallway. And those bumping into each other is not accidental. They know so-and-so is going from here to there, and it occurs, and in that, a few words are exchanged.
Well, I mean, again, Professor Choksy, you're right. I mean, at this moment that we don't know the results or the impact after Saturday's meeting, but it is still crucial at the same time to see how Donald Trump balanced the global trade ambition or global trade progress, but also to seeing how the foreign policy or how this relationship is going to play out between Iran and U.S. Too many balls need to be juggled at the same time, but meanwhile, we're still seeing Donald Trump as this unpredictable disruptor for the 2025 political world. Well, Professor Choksy, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. We'd love to have you back on the show for our future episodes, and thank you so much for doing this.